Title: He chose me over his sweetheart after being kidnapped, but I didn't go because he'd regret it. Chapter 1: A Choice Repeated. Freya's wrists ached from the coarse rope cutting into her skin as she sat bound to a chair in the cold, dimly lit room. The kidnappers laughed cruelly, circling her like vultures. Before laying out their demand to Marcus, he had to choose between Freya and Evelyn. The moment froze as Freya's chest tightened. She had been here before, in another life, with the same choice presented and the same heartbreak looming. Marcus's trembling voice broke through her memories. His wide, frantic eyes locked with hers, silently pleading for forgiveness as he spoke her name aloud. "Freya," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt and desperation. She wanted to weep, knowing what would come next, the guilt that would shatter him and the pain that would consume her. This time, Freya wouldn't let the cycle repeat. Drawing in a shaky breath, she raised her voice above the kidnappers' jeers. "Take Evelyn," she said firmly, her heart pounding with fear and resolve. Marcus's face contorted in shock and anger, but Freya kept her gaze steady, knowing that sparing Evelyn was the only way to stop the tragedy she had already lived once. As the kidnappers dragged Evelyn away, Freya met Marcus's anguished glare with quiet determination. She would not let herself be a pawn in his guilt again. This time, she would write her own story, even if it meant losing him forever. Chapter 2: Memories of a Broken Past. Freya sat by the window of her small room, watching the rain streak down the glass as memories of her past life replayed in her mind. After Evelyn's death in that life, Marcus had been consumed by guilt. Though he married Freya out of obligation, his love had withered, leaving behind bitterness and resentment that poisoned their lives. Evelyn's funeral had been a quiet, somber affair clouded with whispers of scandal. Freya remembered the accusing stares, the murmured words that blamed her for surviving while Evelyn had not. Marcus's grief turned into venom, and their home became a battlefield where Evelyn's name was a weapon. Even in their rare moments of peace, Marcus's touch was cold, his words laced with anger. Freya spent years trying to mend what couldn't be fixed, but her love was never enough to heal the wounds Evelyn's death had left behind. By the time she finally forced Marcus to agree to a divorce, she was too broken to care that his last act of rage had taken both their lives. This second chance felt both like a blessing and a burden. Freya resolved to do things differently this time. She wouldn't sacrifice herself for Marcus's guilt or his love. She deserved more than a life shadowed by someone else's memory. Chapter 3: The Aftermath of Survival. When Marcus arrived to see her after the rescue, his face was pale, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you let me save you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. Freya met his gaze calmly, though her heart raced. "Because you would have regretted it," she said simply, watching his eyes widen in disbelief. Evelyn, though alive, was deeply shaken by the ordeal. Freya observed from the sidelines as Marcus devoted all his energy to comforting her, his guilt palpable in every action. It was a stark reminder of the role she had once played, the wife who bore the brunt of his unspoken sorrow. This time, Freya refused to let herself be drawn back into the same cycle. When their families tried to pressure her into resuming the engagement, she surprised them by firmly refusing. Marcus was stunned by her defiance, his frustration boiling over in their next conversation. "You're running away," he accused, his voice sharp with anger. Freya didn't waver. "I'm saving myself," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. For the first time, she felt the strength of her resolve, the courage to put her happiness above everyone else's expectations. Chapter 4: Building a New Life. Freya stepped off the train into the quiet seaside town, the salty breeze carrying a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She rented a small cottage on the edge of town, spending her days working in a local bookstore and her evenings listening to the calming crash of waves. The simplicity of her new life felt like a balm for her soul. But the nights were harder. In the darkness, memories of Marcus crept back, the warmth of his rare smiles, the moments when he'd held her as if she were the only thing keeping him grounded. Those memories clashed with the pain he had caused, leaving her heart torn between longing and relief. One day, while walking along the beach, Freya met Adrian, a man with a quiet charm and an easy smile. His kind words and gentle humor made her laugh in a way she hadn't in years. Adrian's presence began to fill the void in her heart, though she was hesitant to let herself believe in love again. As weeks turned into months, Adrian's patience and understanding slowly broke through Freya's defenses. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she began to imagine a future unclouded by her past. Yet, a part of her wondered if she was truly ready to let go of Marcus and the life they could have had. Chapter 5: Ghosts of the Past. Freya was adjusting to her new life when she received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope bore the family crest she thought she had left behind. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper with Marcus's familiar handwriting. The words were sharp and desperate, a mixture of guilt and anger. He demanded to know why she had abandoned their engagement and accused her of running away from her responsibilities. Beneath his frustration, Freya sensed the undertone of fear that she wouldn't come back. Adrian noticed her pale expression that evening and asked if she was all right. Freya hesitated before telling him about Marcus and her past. Adrian listened without judgment, his calm presence grounding her as she relived the memories she'd been trying to escape. For the first time, Freya spoke the words she'd never admitted, even to herself. "I loved him," she said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "But his love always belonged to someone else." Adrian's response was simple yet profound: "Maybe it's time to give your love to someone who deserves it." Chapter 6: Confrontation. A week later, Freya was startled to find Marcus waiting outside her cottage. His presence was both familiar and jarring, a reminder of the life she had fought to leave behind. He looked worn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something she couldn't quite place, regret, perhaps. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within her. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart ache. "You were right," he said finally. "I would have regretted it. But that doesn't mean I can let you go." Freya felt a surge of anger. "You don't get to make that decision for me, Marcus," she replied. "You chose me because you thought it was the right thing to do, not because you loved me. I won't live in the shadow of your guilt anymore." Marcus flinched, but he didn't back down. "I didn't understand what I had until I lost you," he admitted. "I made mistakes, so many mistakes, but I want to make things right. Please, Freya. Come back." Her heart wavered for a moment before she remembered the years of pain and loneliness. "No," she said firmly. "This time, I'm choosing myself." Chapter 7: Moving Forward. The confrontation with Marcus left Freya emotionally drained but resolute. She had finally closed a chapter of her life that had haunted her for too long. As she sat by the shore that evening, the waves crashing against the rocks seemed to echo the release she felt in her heart. Adrian joined her, his quiet presence comforting as always. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Freya nodded, though tears streamed down her cheeks. "For the first time in a long time, I think I am," she said. Over the following weeks, Freya threw herself into building her new life. She took up painting, a hobby she had abandoned years ago, and found joy in capturing the beauty of the world around her. Adrian became a constant in her life, his kindness and patience giving her the strength to trust again. Though memories of Marcus lingered, they no longer held power over her. Freya knew she had made the right decision, not just by leaving Marcus, but by choosing to prioritize her own happiness. She was finally free to live the life she deserved. Chapter 8: A New Beginning. Months passed, and Freya found herself thriving in ways she never thought possible. Her art had gained attention in the local community, and she began selling her paintings in a small gallery. The future she once thought was impossible was now within her grasp. Adrian surprised her one evening with a bouquet of wildflowers and an invitation to dinner. As they walked along the beach afterward, he took her hand in his, the warmth of his touch steady and reassuring. Freya, he said, stopping to face her. I know you've been through so much, but I want you to know I'm here for you, no matter what. Tears filled Freya's eyes as she realized how far she had come. Adrian wasn't just offering her love, he was offering her the freedom to be herself, unburdened by the past. For the first time, she felt ready to accept it. As they stood beneath the fading light of the sunset, Freya smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. Her heart was no longer weighed down by guilt or regret. She had finally found her peace, and with it, a new beginning. Chapter 9: Shadows That Linger. Though Freya had moved forward, remnants of the past continued to resurface like ripples on a calm sea. One afternoon, a letter arrived, a formal invitation to a gathering hosted by Marcus's family. She stared at the elegant card, her emotions swirling between curiosity and apprehension. Adrian found her later, the card still clutched in her hand. Are you going to go? He asked gently, his tone free of pressure. Freya hesitated. I don't know. It feels like a test, a way to see if I've truly let go, she admitted. Adrian nodded, offering his unwavering support. Whatever you decide, I'll be right here. The decision weighed on her for days. Part of her longed to confront Marcus and show him how much she had changed. Another part of her feared that stepping back into that world would undo all the progress she had made. Ultimately, Freya realized the choice wasn't about Marcus or anyone else, it was about reclaiming her story. On the day of the event, Freya donned a dress that symbolized her transformation, elegant and confident, yet comfortable in its simplicity. As she looked at her reflection, she saw a woman who had survived heartbreak, guilt, and betrayal, and emerged stronger for it. Chapter 10: Facing the Past. The gathering was as grand as Freya remembered from her past life, filled with the social elite she had once felt invisible among. Heads turned as she entered, her presence commanding attention. Freya moved through the room with grace, her chin held high, ignoring the whispers that followed her. Marcus found her quickly, his expression a mix of surprise and longing. You came, he said, his voice soft but strained. Freya offered him a polite smile. I came for closure, not for you, she replied, her tone firm but not unkind. As the evening unfolded, Freya noticed Marcus watching her from across the room, his guilt and regret etched into his features. Evelyn approached her at one point, her demeanor shy but sincere. I never thanked you for what you did, she said softly. You saved me. Freya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. In that moment, she realized she had done more than break free from her past, she had rewritten it. For the first time, Evelyn was not a source of pain but a reminder of the strength it took to make the hardest choices. Chapter 11: A New Kind of Strength. After the gathering, Marcus sought her out. They walked through the garden, the cool night air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. I wanted to apologize, he began, his voice heavy with emotion. For everything. I was blind to what I had, and I hurt you in ways I can never take back. Freya listened quietly, her heart steady. You hurt yourself too, Marcus, she said. You let guilt dictate your life, and in doing so, you destroyed what we could have been. I've forgiven you, but I won't go back. Her words stunned him, and for a moment, Marcus seemed lost. Do you think we could have been happy? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Freya thought about it before replying. Maybe, if things had been different. But we can't change the past. We can only learn from it. As she walked away, Freya felt a sense of peace. Marcus's apology didn't undo the pain he had caused, but it gave her the closure she needed. She was no longer defined by his choices or his love. She was free to live on her terms. Chapter 12: Love Reclaimed. Freya returned home to Adrian, who greeted her with his usual warm smile. How did it go? He asked, concern flickering in his eyes. Freya sank into the couch beside him, exhaling deeply. It was closure, she said simply. I needed to hear his apology, but it doesn't change anything. Adrian wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You've come so far," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I'm proud of you." Freya leaned into him, feeling the weight of the evening dissolve in his embrace. As they sat together, Freya realized how much her life had transformed. With Adrian, she had found a love that didn't demand sacrifice or pain, a love that was gentle, patient, and real. She no longer felt the shadow of her past looming over her. The future stretched out before her like an open road, full of possibilities. And for the first time, Freya was ready to embrace it, knowing she was no longer bound by the mistakes or regrets of the past. Chapter 14: A Love That Heals. As Freya's studio opened its doors, her days became busier but also more fulfilling. Parents brought their children to learn from her, and her classes quickly became popular. She reveled in the joy of seeing young minds discover their creativity, each brushstroke a testament to possibility. Adrian was her steadfast supporter, always finding ways to lighten her load. Whether it was bringing her lunch on hectic days or helping her organize exhibitions, his actions spoke volumes about his devotion. One evening, after a successful gallery event, Freya and Adrian walked hand in hand along the beach. The moonlight shimmered on the water, creating a scene so serene it felt like a painting. "You've brought so much light into my life," Freya said softly. Adrian paused, turning to face her. "Freya, you've done the same for me," he replied. "Loving you feels like the most natural thing in the world." As their lips met in a gentle kiss, Freya felt a warmth she had never known, a love rooted not in obligation, but in mutual respect and care. Chapter 15: The Echoes Fade. Marcus's name came up less and less as the months went by, his presence fading like an echo in the distance. Freya occasionally wondered how he was, but the thought no longer brought pain. She hoped he had found his own peace, just as she had found hers. Evelyn sent a letter one day, expressing gratitude and sharing news of her own healing journey. She had started a foundation to help victims of traumatic experiences, turning her pain into a mission to support others. Freya was moved by the letter, grateful that Evelyn had found purpose in her struggles. Freya wrote back, offering words of encouragement and a promise to contribute to the foundation through her art. The exchange of letters became a small but meaningful way for Freya to close that chapter of her life, knowing she had made a difference. In her heart, Freya understood that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to honor the lessons of the past while embracing the promise of the present. Chapter 16: A New Legacy. Years later, Freya stood in her bustling studio, watching as children filled the space with laughter and creativity. Her art had gained recognition beyond the town, and her gallery now hosted exhibitions from artists across the region. Adrian entered, carrying their 2-year-old daughter on his shoulders. The little girl squealed with delight as she reached for Freya, her tiny hands outstretched. Freya took her daughter into her arms, kissing her chubby cheeks as Adrian grinned beside them. Looking around, Freya felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, a life built on courage, resilience, and love. The shadows of her past no longer loomed over her. Instead, they had become part of the mosaic that made her who she was. As Freya gazed out of the studio window, the sun setting on another beautiful day, she knew she had found everything she needed. She had chosen herself, and in doing so, she had found a love and life that were truly worth living.